Hello, it's Peter Wright and Kathleen Beauvais in Ontario, Canada, with episode number 130 of the Yakking Show. That's right, we're nearly a third of our way to the second century of this show. This is the show for awakening you to new perspectives for the very changing world we find ourselves living in. First, I must welcome my co-host, Kathleen Beauvais from Waterloo. And just to put a plug in for Kathleen, she wears another hat, and it's called Kerry Tech Solutions, and she helps people find IT talent. But that's enough for now. I will ask first, hi, Kathleen, how are you doing?
Hi, Peter. I'm doing great. And thanks for the plug. I really appreciate it.
That's great. And I was going to ask you to introduce our guest before I welcomed you. So I apologize to everyone for that. Over to you. You do the honors for our guest.
No worries. And first, we want to thank you for joining us today. We so appreciate you and we love reading your comments. So please keep those coming. And if anyone out there is interested in being a guest on our show, don't hesitate to reach out to either Peter or myself. And as Peter mentioned, we have a special guest with us today, and we're very excited to have her. Please welcome, I knew I was going to miss this. I'm sorry.
Liesl.
Liesl Ulrich-Verderber. Hello, Liesl. How are you?
Hello. Good. I know it's quite a mouthful. It's fine.
It's a beautiful name. I wasn't sure about the pronunciation on Liesl.
No worries. I've heard so many variations on it. I've heard Liesl Ulrich-Verderber. I've heard a lot of different things. I think you nailed it.
But I've got to jump in here. I don't know why, but when I hear Liesl, it makes me think of Sound of Music. I don't know. Yeah. Was there a Liesl in Sound of Music?
Yes, there is. It's the oldest daughter. My parents were on theme there. So there you go.
There we go.
My one of my very all-time favorite movies. But anyways, so Liesl, you had the organization called Ever Widening Circles. The mission of this organization is to change the negative dialogue about our times. And so for our audience, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to start this beautiful mission?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so Ever Widening Circles is an online publication and now community that, like you said, is on a mission to change the negative dialogue about our times. And we do that by celebrating insights and innovation that prove it's still an amazing world. And how we got there is kind of a little sideways. I ended up there after I graduated from college, but the organization itself was started by my mother, Linda Ulrich, Dr. Linda Ulrich. She had been a dentist for, I think at that point, 25 years. And she had the kind of practice where they were really working to keep the humanity in healthcare. And she one day got an email from a young patient of hers who she'd known since he was a toddler, and he had decided to join the U.S. military and had ended up in Afghanistan or Iraq. I can't quite remember. And he sent her an email saying, Dr. Linda, I'm seeing sort of this darkness around me and I don't see anything positive. Is there anything? Why should I keep going? And she looked around the internet. She didn't know it was politics, but she was just trying to find a place that was celebrating the good happening in the world. And she couldn't find it. There was no place that didn't have some crazy political slant or pop-ups happening all the time. And this is back in 2014. So she couldn't find any place that was just celebrating the good things that were happening in the world. And so my mom, being my mom, she decided to build the website herself. And so it started a little bit as a blog, but she just started writing one article every day on any subject under the sun that proved it was still an amazing world. And then when I came along the following year after graduating from Harvard, I really got into it because I wanted students to be able to see that same positive perspective on the world. And then from there, I fell in love with the business side of things, really started to break down my cynical nature that I developed. And that's how I ended up with Ever Widening Circles. And we really tried to grow it from a blog into now a full-blown media company. So it has been quite a journey over the past 6 or 7 years.
Wow, it certainly sounds like it. Eh? And you've partly answered what I was dying to ask you, and that's how do you go about countering all the negativity in the world? As I agree with you and your mother, there's far too much negativity. And in our little way, that's some of the background of this Yakking show. We started it at the beginning of the coronavirus thing to try and spread some positivity because everyone was so full of doom and gloom when we were looking at 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and little knowing it would be a lot longer. So
Yes.
we notice it too. We try in our own little way to help. So how do you do it? How do you go about countering negativity?
Yeah, so I think it really helps to explain how we got to so much negativity. And so it's this strange combination. The first part of it is, of course, the 24-hour news cycle, right? If we have to continuously be putting out things out there, especially news, the unique thing about news is that it actually doesn't happen all the time. Because it's newsworthy because it's a novel, right? And so what we're really reporting on are things that are tiny percentages. The bad is a very small percentage of what's actually going on.
I agree.
But because it's newsworthy, right? But when we have the 24-hour news cycle, we need something to talk about 24 hours. So we're really trying to find every bad, unique thing that's happening and to fill up the air, right? So you combine that with the problem of the human brain is really good at recognizing patterns. And what the human brain does is it will conjure to mind first what it sees most. So that used to be very, very helpful back in the day. You heard a twig snap and you knew it related to something bad coming after you in the woods. And so you got out of there. But for us now, that means that we're walking through the world with a high amount of fear, because what we know of the world from our spheres of media or our news outlets is that it's constantly bad, right? But in reality, there's a balance. There are so many people that are doing good in the world, that are going uncelebrated, that are saving the rainforest with old cell phones, that are using goats to stop wildfires, that are doing all these incredible things. But we don't hear about them because generally the work that they do is very slow. It's happening and the progress is happening, but progress is happening daily at a slow level. So by that account, it's not necessarily newsworthy, right? So really what we have to do when we talk about how do we see more positivity? How do we engage more positivity? It really does start with understanding why we see the world so negatively and what news and newsworthiness is, because then we can start understanding that there is a balance, that there is a balance out there. We just have to know how to find it.
So I think my next question, I think you've somewhat answered it, because it seems like people are drawn to hearing about atrocities and everything negative. I mean, certainly that's what's being fed on mainstream media. Absolutely. So is there something in us, do you think, that is drawn to those stories versus the good news, the fuzzy, I don't know. I personally would prefer to hear a wonderful good news story rather than an atrocity, but I know a lot of people are drawn to that. What is that?
Right. So what I think is really interesting is that I think it was the New York Times did a study on what articles got the most shares. And the news articles that got the most shares were the ones that elicited fear, anger, or awe. So the awe one, I think, is the most interesting here. So our brains, like I said, it's like a learning to see the world in positive terms, or seeing more or finding more positivity. It's like a muscle that you have to flex. And we have this great process we walk people through called the 4 shifts. And the first one, that it becomes like a matter of mindfulness, right? It's a habit for us to be drawn to negativity. It's a habit for us to engage in those downward spiral conversations, right? It is so much easier for us, because we're so inundated with negativity, to say, oh God, the weather is so bad this week, as the first thing we say to a stranger. How peculiar of us, right? So when we talk about the 4 shifts, the first thing that we do in the 4 shifts is we tell people to pause, right? Like, pause when you're about to say something, when you're about to click on something negative. Just pause and ask yourself, does the world need more of this? Do I really need to share one more gloomy thing that I learned today? Do I really need to share that one more chaotic post? Does the world need more of that content, whether it's spoken content or content I'm sharing on social media? And the second thing that you can do is ignore more, right? Like, we can choose to ignore the negativity more often. And what happens is our brain starts to let that go much easier. It's like when you become when you start to train your brain to ignore the things that are making you feel fear or anger or acrimony, right? And elicit that reaction, you can start to let that go, and you start to pause first, and then you can ignore more of that kind of content that elicits those kind of like gut sort of, I don't want to say mean, but those sort of mean responses, right? So we can choose to do that. And then what we can do is we can seek signs of goodness and progress. And this is the best one, I think, for retraining and recalibrating what we're sensing. A great story for this is my mom had a friend who went to the grocery store, and my mom happened to be going to dinner with her afterward. And she was so mad. This is the beginning of the pandemic. They had no masks. All these people were like, had their masks down below their nose. They were doing this, they were doing that. She was so incensed. She was so angry. And my mom said, wait a minute, did you notice anything good about any of your interactions? And she could remember one thing. And so my mom said, try this. Next time you go to the grocery store, force yourself to count the number of positive things that you see, the number of people that make room for you in the aisles, the fact that they have Purell at every single corner, or they have the Clorox wipes by the carts. Count the number of positive things and see how you feel after your next trip to the grocery store. And so she did. And she found that she could count 30 positive things and only 3 or 4 negative things. So as we start to retrain our brains, as we start to notice and seek signs of goodness and progress, those will start to be the things that bubble up to the top. Remember how I said our brains will see things more often if we see them more often, notice more often, if we see them more often, that you can retrain your brain for that. And the last and most important thing, secondary to that, is to share signs of goodness and progress. And this is how we keep sort of passing it on to other people, right? Instead of engaging in these toxic downward spiral conversations when we get on the phone with a loved one, or we get on a Zoom call with our coworkers, instead of saying, oh, it's such bad weather, did you hear about this tragic thing, the universe is on fire, instead pausing and saying, hey, did you hear about this person that's doing a really good thing in that town? Or when someone does bring up the negative thing, being armed with the knowledge to add in, I don't want to say a positive thing, I'm not trying to be Pollyanna, but rather something to balance the conversation. For us, it's really about, we know that the rainforest is on fire. We know that there are forest fires happening, but there are people that are working really hard in innovative ways to combat those problems. And if we are sharing those stories, those people get more support, those people get more funding, and those people can keep doing the work that they're doing while also having conversations that are more positive and productive with one another.
I have a spin-off question then. Because of what's happening in the world right now, and we're hearing about it all the time, 24/7, there's a fine line between, well, I don't know, maybe with your expertise, you can tell me, between increasing people's awareness of what's happening in the world and what they can do about it, and always putting positive, I guess maybe I've just answered my own question, putting positive spin to what's happening in the world. But yet we want to make people aware of what's happening, because there's a lot of people that may not be aware of some of the stuff that's going on, and you want them to be aware of it, but it might come across as negative. How do you handle that?
Yeah. So I think a great way of looking at this, I'm sure you guys have maybe that have said, I'm going on a news fast. I'm turning off the news. I'm not reading, it's too negative. Well, we think of media and news as like a diet. And I think we should really think of it as this way. If you go on a fast, you come out dazed, confused, and then you come out probably consuming more of the thing than you went into like not see than when you started. So in our case, we like to think of it as a balanced diet, right? If you think of those big, heavy, important, really important, I am one for find good news outlets, ones that are doing real reporting, doing news and not opinion. So, you can learn to differentiate between news and opinion. Find the news outlets that are really doing the news and only engage with it a few times a day, right? Imagine those big, important, heavy, you need to know what's going on if we want to change anything. Imagine those though as like a big, nutritious meal. You can't eat a nutritious meal every 10 minutes checking Twitter, if that's the sort of thing that we're doing here. Where if we're constantly checking those heavy news stories, we're going to feel sick by the end of the day. We're going to be overwhelmed by the end of the day. But if we balance out the information that we're getting, and then in the middle, we're putting things like content that is like we do at Ever Widening Circles, where it's this balanced sort of solutions-based content, then what we're able to do is take a look at the problems of the world that we need to be informed about, but not leave them with a sense of world weariness or a sense of future fatalism. Rather, we can have sort of, I would say, like a passionate, fierce optimism, right? Something that we can't make change in the world unless we believe it's possible to change it. So we have to maintain our sense of fierce optimism, which requires us to know about the things that are happening in the world. So I think you're totally right. It is this balance, Kathleen, of of learning about the world, but not letting it soak into us so deeply that we feel a sense that we're trapped and we can't do anything about it.
Mm. No.
Yep. You're sort of preaching to the converted here, because I got to tell you,
Yeah.
I got rid of satellite TV 7 or 8 years ago, and I recently got rid of Netflix as well. So I watch a channel that gives British, and because of my background of being born in Britain and living in Africa most of my life, it's primarily British and Australian TV series, and a lot of positive stuff, a little bit of blood and guts, but positive stuff. I don't get a daily newspaper, and I have a very select list of other platforms on the internet that I watch. So yeah, I'm very careful. There's another, I want to ask you something else, but here's a thought. I lived a very different life to most North Americans or Europeans, facing a lot of danger and violence and really bad stuff, and survived all of it. So when people say to me, you're not at all concerned about this virus, I said, you know, when you've had people pointing guns in your face, you have more things to worry about. So am I right in saying that if one has lived a much broader and different and less comfortable life, perhaps one doesn't get quite so caught up in this negativity, or am I just clutching at straws here?
No, I think that there's something to be said for, if we have a broader view, we're able to see the world in, and maybe that doesn't mean that we have to face tragedy, but we can still have a broad view, and that helps us see the world in more clearer terms, right? So one of the things that I do through Ever Widening Circles is I work through education. We have an education wing of Ever Widening Circles that takes our content that's good for schools and educators and creates mini lesson plans that they can use. And what we see there is kids are really afraid of the world. And I'm using quotes here, and small problems to kids are big problems to them, but relatively small problems in large terms. When they're able to see that the world is much broader than the little world that they know, when they're able to see the complexity of the world, suddenly they're able to engage with more complex issues with a little bit more nuance, with less fear, right? So I think what you're tapping into is that maybe it isn't that it's this broadness of experience that if we can give students that in the best way that I think right now is through video content. If we can give students a broadness of experience, it gives them perspective with which to gauge the world's events and also their own personal lives, but also to be able to understand that the world around them is vastly more similar to them than they know and think, right? If you only know of Afghanistan, the war and what's been happening and everything negative there, but then you learn that there's this like skateboarding crew that's going out that's teaching girls to skateboard and getting them to school, like suddenly there's humanity in this place that you've always found fear in, and that kind of opens your perspective to be able to see that in other places.
Yeah, good point. I think you're right there. Yeah. So what I wanted to ask you, your thoughts. Some historians, and I've got one book in particular called The Pendulum Theory, where this author's traced society from Roman times to now. And he says we're going in 80-year cycles, and he calls it from the me generation to the we. And it's amazing how detailed a study he's done, everything from music to dress to everything. And he reckons we're at the trough, in the bottom of the trough of this strange period we're going through, and in next year 2023 it'll start turning around and getting into more positive and more balanced. He says we swing between one extreme and the other, and we're at the extreme, getting near the extreme. Do you think there's some merit in that, or do you think we just go for trends and evolution and all that?
I think that's an interesting, because I was just talking about this on another podcast, of the way in which Gen Z, these young people that are now graduating college and younger, how they are, a lot of them that are driven to do good in the world are so in that we headspace. They understand that their future is dependent on a communal fixing of the environment, a communal changing of systems. And so they really are, it's so interesting. And I'm like 6 years removed from it. I'm like in the middle millennials, like we're still a little bit we're not that self-centered. We're trying hard here. But they're in this, the Gen Zers are really in this space about thinking of, like, they feel a sense of urgency that they need to get everybody on board with them if they're going to make changes, these changes that need to happen for them to see themselves living to 100 and 110 or however long they're expected to live. So I think I think there is some interesting, I'm really interested, actually, I might go read that book, but I think there is some merit to that, in that I think this younger generation of people, even though we say they're self-centered and all of these things, and we make fun of their selfie videos, they're really cognizant of the communal way that isn't just their small community, it's planetary almost. Their understanding of their place in the future and what needs to happen in order for them to be able to live long and prosperous lives like the generations before them.
Interesting.
Yes. Yeah. Can you tell our audience about the conspiracy of goodness?
Yeah. So I know the word conspiracy gets people a little on edge, but I promise there's a good story there. So conspiracy of goodness is a movement, a wave of goodness and progress that we've seen happening all around the world. And we got the name from that, from a story. There's an old story. Essentially during World War II, there was a town in France called Le Chambon, and this town saved thousands of Jewish people, particularly children, and they did it sort of independent of one another. There was no organization. There were people that just wanted to save and help other people. And so after the war, there was a famous rabbi who was giving a talk about the conspiracy of evil that was World War II. And one of the gentlemen in the back stood up and he said, "We talk a lot about the conspiracy of evil that was World War II, but what about the conspiracy of goodness? You know, I was a Dutch rescuer and I couldn't have saved a family of people without the help of the milkman, the mailman, and the garbage man. All of them knew that something was happening, but they all stood up together in this conspiracy of goodness." And I think what's beautiful about that is there is this wave of goodness and progress going on. It's unorganized, it is under the radar, but there are people doing good all around the world in this conspiracy of goodness together, that need to be celebrated, in that we need to share signs of goodness and progress. If we don't share that they exist, a lot of these organizations don't get funded, they don't get support, and they don't get to make the progress that they can potentially make. So the conspiracy of goodness for us is really this way of bringing all of those points and those pinpoints of light and it can be really lonely to do a lot of good in the world, but bringing those people together so they have a community, so they know that there's support from one another, and that they can work together in this ecosystem and find people to support them. So the conspiracy of goodness, I will also say this, the word conspiracy, if it still scares you, it breaks down into two words: con, which is with, and spirare, which is to breathe. So to breathe, to breathe together, to breathe with, con being together, con together, spirare, to breathe together in this conspiracy of goodness is so important, because I think we can see ourselves breathing life into a new era, into a new way of being, and I think it can be led by those that are in the conspiracy of goodness. It's not an impossible dream. We just need 25% of people to care, and then we can make major change.
Yeah, no, great. And there's lots of other good things happening that go unrecognized on the individual level. If you keep your eyes open all the time, you see people doing, some pretty good things. So yeah, that's great. What about your Amazing World Media? What are you doing with that? That's another exciting story, I think.
Yeah. So Amazing World Media, we realized that there was this big divide in, media is we see it everywhere, especially in hospitals. And this project got sidetracked a little bit with COVID. We launched it right as COVID-19 was really becoming bad here in the United States. So it's fallen back a little bit, but it's a project that we're working on to get positive video content into hospital settings, and to business settings as well. So if you think about it, like, you're sitting in the waiting room at a stressful time. Maybe you're sitting in the waiting room waiting for someone to come out of surgery. Maybe you're waiting with your broken arm in the ER. And what do we have playing on the TV? In the US, they had to stop playing the news because that was bad. So they turn on the Weather Channel. And the Weather Channel here in the US is like a man standing in the middle of a hurricane telling you about the scary thing that's happening. And by the way, I did some research. Turns out weather is one of the scariest things to humans because it's completely unpredictable. Right. And then on the Weather Channel, I like to point out how unpredictable this bit of weather that they're getting is. So it's really the whole, and then of course the ads then are in the US in particular are for like all these different like stress, these different pharmaceuticals for stress and depression. It's like, well, that truly makes sense. So the best that a lot of hospitals could do is like get a video of like a flag waving in the breeze to sort of, maybe, entertain people while they waited with a broken arm. So we really saw like a huge part of what we do at Ever Widening Circle is curate incredible video content. We work with these small content creators to curate and showcase their stuff on Ever Widening Circles as a part of our articles. And we pitched this idea to them like, yes, please help people with my content. You know, a lot of these people get into it. It's really a thankless job to be a positive short documentarian, very specific niche, but luckily there are a lot of people out there. So our goal with that is to take that content, put it together and package it so that hospitals and healthcare facilities can use it as well as businesses, because we are not going to be, you know, going up to the receptionist with a positive way of being, or be kind to a nurse who's had a long day if we ourselves are stressed out about what we just had blaring at us in the waiting room. So that's our foray into healthcare, and we really can't wait for that to be able to take off after we're out of this current moment of crisis.
Oh, that's wonderful. I know exactly what you mean. I try to keep away from hospitals, but I can remember not that long ago having to go for an X-ray, I don't know, whatever, some test, and being told to sit in the waiting room and wait. And I sat sort of, the nearest seat was facing the TV screen, and it came up with the news. I thought, I really don't need this. You know, I just cut out getting it at home. So I went the other side of the waiting room where I was my back to the TV screen. Yeah.
It's and there's so much we can be doing positive as well to help educate patients while they're there. Another great thing that we see too is the potential to teach patients sort of as interstitials, the commercials, if you will, between the videos, teaching patients about what their healthcare team looks like, who's on it themselves, their own advocate, all these who they're talking to in the hospital, what is their job, and really try and break down this communication barrier that a lot of health organizations are having, of patients either feeling too overwhelmed to ask questions or to not know who to ask the right questions to. And so really helping to prepare the patient while they're sitting there to be able to go in and have a really engaged time with their provider, even if it is that allotted 15 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever it is. So I think there's a lot of good that can be done through video content. That's something I'm clearly very passionate about. And so our hope is that we can get that going, hopefully in the next coming years.
No, that's a really good idea. Excellent.
So this is a business that you're putting together, or a service for the greater good of all, basically.
Yeah.
So that something that you
so it'll be
as a business.
Yeah. So it'll be a spin-off of Ever Widening Circles, using some of and partnering with some incredible short filmmakers that we already have great relationships with.
That is amazing. Wonderful.
Very good. So I've got one for you based on your experience, and you, just listening to you, are very knowledgeable on this. So what would you say is the most important characteristic that helps or distinguishes between happy and contented people and the majority who seem to be just surviving and just not really enjoying life? What's the key?
You know, I think it is sort of odd. This is going to be a very odd answer, but I think it's being rather content, right? I think happiness is something that we focus so hard on, right? We attain it, but we know it's fleeting. And there's a lot of research. We actually wrote an article about this. So there's a lot of research to say that content people are the ones that are quote unquote happiest. So the ones that don't swing so far up and down and up and down. And it's really in that swing, I believe, that people find the most pain, if you will. And if I always think it's so funny, because in the US, the Constitution, it's like the Declaration of Independence, it says like the pursuit of happiness. That's like one of the main missions of Americans, is the pursuit of happiness, not the attainment of happiness, not the goal of getting, it's just like the pursuing. And I think in the pursuing is very often where we get the most disappointment. I'm not happy right now, so I'm going to change my job, or I'm not happy right now, so I need to buy that new thing, or I'm not happy right now, so I need to go do this next thing, instead of saying, what am I really grateful for? What am I really content with in my life? And I think there's a great thought leader that we feature called Srikumar. His name is Srikumar Rao. He talks a lot about this, is like, if we're constantly swinging from happiness to sadness to happiness to sadness, we find ourselves in this pendulum swing, where if we find ourselves contented and feeling gratitude more often, we feel a lot more calm, and the happiness will come and the sadness will come, but we will find ourselves at this even keel, this wonderful even keel, far, far more often. So that's my thoughts on that. I don't know if I'm 100% right on them. I'm sure there are lots of other philosophers who have thought more about it.
I think you're very accurate. And it reminds me, I'm a great follower of the Stoic philosophers, Marcus Aurelius, and I've done a lot of reading on
Yeah.
that philosophy, and by circumstance had to practice it quite extensively myself. I think you're spot on with that. What's that lovely little quotation of Goethe's? I think happiness is a ball which we chase and kick with our feet as soon as it stops rolling, or something. His words
Yeah.
are better than I, but it puts it into perspective. No,
Right.
I think you're onto it. That's a good answer.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I don't think it's complacency, right? Like there's a difference between contentness and complacency.
Yeah.
If we're in a place that does make us feel uncomfortable and we find ourselves sustained in uncontentedness, I think yes, we can pursue, like it's good to pursue contentedness, but I think it's not great when we construe happiness and contentedness and try and get to that happiness quota all the time. That's like, it's just unattainable, and it's exhausting to try and get there.
Absolutely. And what I find huge difference in North America compared to Africa, where I spent most of my life, where there's a lot of very poor people, and yet I would say my unscientific assessment is there's a greater level of happiness in Africa amongst the poor people than there is in the first world amongst the better off people. And some of the most contented people I met were people who, by our estimation, had nothing. They lived in a little grass hut and had a bicycle, and yet, boy, they were okay with that.
And you know what, Peter, that was my experience in South America, in Peru,
Sure.
and right into the jungle of the Amazons. I mean, I remember this one day, and I'm stealing your thunder here for a moment, but I remember these ladies washing their clothes in the Amazon River, and they were singing, and they were joyous, and they had nothing. In our eyes, in terms of material goods, they lived in huts and had virtually nothing. And here they are, so joyous. What a lesson for the rest of us, really, truly. Well, I think we're out of time.
Yeah, we're getting close to it. Yeah.
Yes. How do people contact you?
Yes. So the best place to find us is at everwideningscircles.com, like when you drop a pebble in the pond and the ripples go out. We also have a shorter one, ewc.co. So you can find us there online. Please do subscribe to our weekly newsletter. It's a great way to keep up with our content and get your sort of little dose of optimism in your inbox. You can also follow us on all social medias. You just search Ever Widening Circles. And then if you'd like to get in touch with me personally, I'm on Instagram at Liesl, Liesl.uv. I love when people after these interviews have questions for me further and contact me there. I try and be really available over there. So please do follow us on social media. Join us over at everwideningscircles.com. We put out 3 new articles a week that are all about helping you connect to this greater movement of goodness and progress that's happening around the world, and give you some fodder on that. Be in search of goodness and progress, like I talked about. So come join us. And if you're really interested, we have a summit coming up on October 10th. We have tickets available for that. It's going to be an incredible time. We are talking to thought leaders who are living with purpose, and we are helping our audience do the same there. So if you'd like to join us, you can catch tickets at CogSummit.com. So those are the best ways that you can connect and be a part of our community.
Fantastic.
Great.
Thank you. And I'll be sure to subscribe to your newsletter, because I've got
please.
articles for sure.
Most definitely. And Kathleen will round us off in a minute. But before I go, just good luck when you're on your new adventures that you have coming up. And we look forward to following your thoughts from there. So thanks very much, Liesl.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Liesl. And thank you all so very much for tuning into our show. Once again, we love reading your comments, so do please keep those coming. And if anyone out there is interested in being a guest on our show, please don't hesitate to reach out to either Peter or myself. So until next time, take care. Bye-bye, everyone.